Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating clinical concept, Otto Fenichel's framework on psychosis and schizophrenia, specifically focusing on deep regression and restitution. Get ready, because we're about to explore the very layers of ego formation and what happens when reality itself completely collapses.
Before we really get into the weeds, let's set a firm boundary. We are discussing Fenichel's historical psychoanalytic model. Let me be clear, this is not a modern biological explanation for schizophrenia. Fenichel himself was a rigorous scientist who knew his limits. He openly acknowledged that schizophrenia is incredibly heterogeneous and almost certainly driven by decisive somatic or biological factors. So no, we aren't blaming bad parenting or purely psychological issues here. What we're borrowing from Fenichel is his brilliant phenomenological lens. It's a way to understand the patient's internal experience psychologically, not the anatomy of the disease itself.
To make this abstract theory a bit more concrete, imagine a patient sitting right in front of you. They say something like, "The world feels different. People don't seem real. Everything has lost its meaning." It's a terrifying initial complaint, right? The patient literally feels their reality crumbling away. But here's the wild part. Sometime later, this exact same patient might come back with a highly elaborate, detailed explanatory delusion, like how aliens are controlling their thoughts through radio waves. They go from total emptiness to this incredibly complex narrative. So how does that happen?
And that brings us to our central question for this session. In Fenichel's framework, why are the breakdown of reality and the subsequent delusion actually considered two entirely distinct stages? Your gut instinct might tell you that a delusion is just the peak of that mental breakdown. But Fenichel, he flipped that completely upside down. He saw it as a process, an active defense mechanism at work. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll touch on the historical model, move through regression and restitution, look at archaic thinking mechanisms, and finally, wrap up with clinical implications.
Let's jump right into Section 1, the historical model, including heterogeneity and somatic factors. We need to start with a foundational clinical definition in classical psychoanalysis. What actually separates psychosis from neurosis? Well, in neurosis, someone might regress to a childhood developmental phase, maybe the phallic or anal phase, because of an internal conflict. But in psychosis, the developmental origin of that regression goes way, way deeper. It goes all the way back to the very dawn of ego formation. We're talking about that primal stage before the boundary between me and the outside world even exists. It's the point where the connection to reality is completely severed.
So let's unpack the intrapsychic mechanism step by step. Fenichel gave us this historical formula. First, there's a regression toward early narcissism. Second, this equals a loss of emotional investment in objects, meaning the outside world. Third, that leads to a profound disturbance in the relationship with reality. And fourth, the end result is the total disorganization of the ego. Now, a huge word of caution here. Please do not take this literally. The patient isn't physically or mentally turning back into an infant. This is a metaphor for the intrapsychic mechanism. The patient's mind is essentially pulling its energy away from the real world back into itself, cutting off the very contact that keeps reality intact.
Moving on to Section 2, regression and restitution, or the dual-stage breakdown.
The clinical manifestations here are sharply divided into two distinct columns. On one side, we have regression, or the breakdown. This is when the world crumbles and feels empty. You see a loss of cognitive differentiation, depersonalization, magical archaic thinking, grandiosity, or even catatonic stupor. It is pure collapse. On the flip side, we have restitution. This is where hallucinations, delusions, bizarre speech, and unusual social constructions come into play. According to Fenichel, these symptoms aren't the breakdown itself. Instead, they are the mind's desperate attempts to reconstruct meaning and reconnect with the world.
Now for Section 3, restitution, and the effort of rebuilding coherence.
This brings us to a crucial reframing of what a delusion actually is. In a lot of textbooks, delusions and hallucinations are brushed off as random brain malfunctions or just extra symptoms. But in Fenichel's framework, a delusion is a major psychological undertaking. Once that initial contact with reality breaks, the mind simply cannot tolerate floating in an empty void. So it tries to heal itself. It desperately tries to rebuild coherence, crafting a narrative that can tie the world back together, even if that story is completely bizarre.
There's a brilliant metaphor for this, the destroyed city map. Imagine a city completely leveled by an earthquake. The roads are gone, the buildings are just rubble. The old map is entirely useless now. If you're lost in that devastation, your panicked mind is going to try and draw a new map just so you can survive.
This new map might label a bomb crater as the sacred lake, or twisted steel as an alien watchtower. Objectively speaking, yes, the map is totally inaccurate. It's wrong. But psychologically, it's coherent. It gives the patient a structured way to navigate the ruins of their own mind. And that, fundamentally, is what a delusion is.
Section 4. Archaic thinking mechanisms, also known as primary process thinking. When the ego collapses, the mind falls back into what Fenichel called primary process thinking, or archaic thinking. Our usual cause and effect logic just vanishes. The mind starts using heavy symbolism, where an abstract idea is treated as a literal physical object. Everything becomes incredibly concrete. Metaphors are taken as absolute reality, and there's a complete loosening of logical organization. The rules of space, time, and contradiction no longer apply. That's exactly why a delusional narrative often feels like a wakened dream. The mind is using the raw materials of infancy to build its brand new map.
Finally, Section 5. Clinical implications and modern application. If you truly grasp this concept of restitution, your first reaction to a delusional patient will no longer be, how do I debate their delusion with logic and facts? Attacking their new map is only going to make them feel cornered and shove them right back into that terrifying void. Instead, you'll start asking yourself, what horrific experience or fear is this patient trying to organize with this story? This completely transforms your clinical empathy. You aren't agreeing with their bizarre story, but you are validating the deep emotional terror that created it in the first place.
Now, I have to issue a strict clinical mandate here. Do not ever reinforce or literally agree with the delusion. Psychosis is a severe medical condition that absolutely requires a modern psychiatric assessment. Fenichel's phenomenological understanding has to be paired with modern, evidence-based care. That means thorough medical workups, risk and safety assessments, pharmacotherapy with antipsychotics when indicated, and psychosocial treatment. Fenichel's theory helps us build empathy while we provide care, but it never ever replaces that vital medical care.
To wrap things up, let's really think about this core takeaway. The true value of Fenichel's work for us today isn't about finding the cutting-edge biological cause of schizophrenia. Its value is in one profound clinical question. After a person's psychological organization is shattered, how does their remaining mind fight tooth and nail to rebuild coherence and meaning? Realizing that what looks like madness on the outside is actually a desperate attempt at survival on the inside, that is Fenichel's most humane legacy.
And that brings us to the end of our session for today. In our next and final analysis, we're going to tie all these threads together and see how Fenichel synthesizes everything into a highly practical character formulation. It's going to be great. See you then, and keep learning.